on why we need to focus on more than illness to improve mental health outcomes. A warm welcome to our panellists, Dr. Joep van Agteren, Research and Development Lead at the Wellbeing and Resilience Centre at SAHMRI, Ian Westmoreland, Founder and Chairman at Mentoring Men, Stephanie Thompson, Workplaces Program Lead at WayAhead Mental Health Association, New South Wales, and our lovely moderator, Dr. Suzy Green, Clinical and Coaching Psychologist and Founder of the Positivity Institute. Welcome, everybody. Lovely to see you all.
Thanks so much, Tanya.
Thank you, Tanya.
And I'll hand over to you, Suzy.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, lovely to meet the panellists directly face-to-face, finally. Lovely to see you, Joep, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, Ian and Steph. So this is my final session, so it's been a bit of a hectic day today, but this is a topic that I'm perhaps the most passionate about out of all the topics that I've covered at the Workplace Wellness Festival. And I think, for me, just even recently, most people will be aware that there was a New York Times article published by Adam Grant, who's a very well-known business psychologist out of Wharton, called his blog was "There's a name to the blah you've been feeling. It's called languishing." And I had to have a little bit of a giggle at the time because I was actually introduced to the model by Corey Keyes, he does actually reference Corey, which I was really happy about. I was introduced to that model when I was doing my doctorate back in 2002 by Professor Lindsay Odes, who was my doctoral supervisor at the time. And as a clinical psychologist in training, I really found that quite interesting, rather than thinking about mental health and mental illness sitting on one continuum. Corey suggesting that it's a dual continua where we look at low mental health to high, but also low mental illness to high as well. And I do have a graph, and I know you'll hopefully talk about that because you've done some great research around this model as well today. But I think what's happened is that people are now using the language of languishing and flourishing. And I know when I first started in this field quite a while ago, people used to look at you like, what's this F word? So now we've got the language, and wellbeing literacy is a topic that I hope we'll talk a bit about today too, together with the fact that there is increasing recognition in workplaces that treatment alone, aka EAP in the main, is not sufficient. And there's some great, academic papers suggesting that we need the treatment, absolutely, whether it's EAP or a referral. We need to prevent harm through looking at psychosocial risks in particular, but we also need to promote the positive and look at some of the wellbeing science, which we now have quite a strong evidence base for. So to start off the discussion today, I wanted to ask each of you, what's been your approach to mental health and wellbeing in your organisation? And perhaps we could start with you, Joep, if that's okay, at SAHMRI, who's done incredible work here in Australia, leading the way, I would suggest.
Thanks, Suzy. So it was just very interesting to see that New York Times article come out, particularly to put that name languishing to it and see it being used kind of outside maybe our academic sphere, where you see it pop up fairly a fair bit. And I think COVID for the past years, sorry to bring that one up again, but it did make the languishing experience most probably a little bit more front of mind for a lot of us, being taken away from the freedom that we normally could exercise, and to actually just be locked into our homes most probably had a profound impact on a lot of people. And for most of us, that didn't necessarily spiral into clinical mental illness or problems that most probably would warrant a professional to look at it. I know that for a proportion that is the case, but for a lot of us, it just meant that you felt you went into that languishing mode, which felt that you just kind of lost touch with feeling good on a day-to-day basis. You might have had a lack of meaning. You felt your relationships were affected. And yeah, it's good to see that now being pushed in the normal narrative a bit more.
Absolutely. So I hope it in your organisation that you walk the talk, Joep, is that right? And you have embedded and intentionally utilising some of the wellbeing science practices proactively?
Look, we try, and it's always it's I guess that's the balance that every organisation will have, trying to see with how much, like, what are the KPIs that you need to do? What is the work that you want to put out, and how do you still make sure that you implement good well-being practices? We here in SAHMRI, we gave the people the opportunity to flexibly work a lot. So we give a lot of the people here a lot of freedom to kind of job craft, and we try and work with them to make sure that they don't fall into that space. That's really, that's pretty much all that we're doing here. We're always trying to make sure that we touch base to what we preach.
Yeah, I guess my concern at the time was, because even someone that is as skilled as myself, who's been practicing as a psychologist for a long time, that when COVID hit, was I doing everything that I could have done for myself? And I know from previous experience, sometimes when you're right in the eye of the storm, it's very hard to apply your knowledge and skills, which is why I would argue the more people that have these skills, the literacy and the psychological capabilities, we can help each other when we're going through these challenges. What about you, Ian? What about in your organisation?
Well, I like to think that every man should have a joyful and fulfilling life. So we need to get away from languishing towards that. I think mentoring men's going to be different to most of the organisations in this event. So if I could just briefly give an outline, and that will give some context to what I was going to say.
Wonderful.
So our mission is supporting men in their life journey. So it's a free program where a trained and validated volunteer male mentor supports another man experiencing life challenges. Wow. And that could be job loss, it could be relationship breakdown, loneliness or isolation, things like that, lack of purpose, languishing. And our core team who operate the program is about 15 people, but we have over 1,000 men who have engaged in the program. So the comments I'm going to make are on behalf of the 1,000 people in the organisation.
Yes.
And the focus of what we do is early intervention and prevention. We're not a crisis support team. So clearly we want to help prevent people getting to the point of crisis. Yeah. So coming back to our approach, what we've done is everything we can to establish an authentic brand, and we strive to make every communication, every experience that people have with mentoring men to be welcoming, we're approachable, encouraging, valued, safe, positive, inclusive is a big one. And because our program is free, it's also a clear message of there's no ulterior commercial motives in this. Yeah. The comment I was going to make, it's well recognised that for various reasons like shame, stigma, reluctance to be vulnerable, men particularly are reluctant to step out and get support for mental health issues.
Absolutely.
So what I would recommend is that we look at ways like what we've done, and we're constantly refining that. How do we get more men to take that first step to get the shape, forget all those other things I mentioned before, take that first step and actually reach out. So that's something we're striving to do. And I think that's the big challenge, supporting half of the population who need the support.
Absolutely. And I've seen the stigma change a little bit over the 20 years that I've been in the field. We know from research that men historically have been lower on help seeking. And I assume then you have referral systems for those that you recognise do need additional professional support.
Yes, and often we'll work in parallel. There'll be a mentoring relationship in conjunction with professional support. But interestingly, so the vast majority of the people in the mental health space are women. Yet the group with the bigger issues or the more serious repercussions are men. So
yes,
it's
an interesting point. We won't have time to unpack today. I've got my own thoughts about that, but yeah, and I think what you're highlighting too is, for me, our business, Positivity Institute, now plays firmly in the proactive space. I've spent years doing treatment clinically, but we need to be able to work in a complementary sense with different services and know when to refer on in particular. I guess that's been some of my concern with some of the wellness or wellbeing services, is they haven't had adequate mental health training or recognising when to refer on. But Stephanie, you've been in this space for a while, and I've also had the privilege of working with WayAhead and do some incredible work around mental health. What about your organisation? Could you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, so that's interesting, Suzy. When you posed this question to us over email, I immediately was thinking of my network as opposed to my organisation. So, and just in this conversation, I thought, oh, okay, what's my organisation doing? Which is a really good question, because obviously that's what we're all about, not just the Workplaces program, but it's the Mental Health Association. So our number one, I guess, approach to supporting mental health of our employees is really around listening. And making sure that we're bringing people on the journey with us and co-designing anything that we do. So I joined WayAhead in October, and prior to that, I was working at Bupa, actually running their internal wellbeing strategy. And so I've got that sort of wellbeing program design lens. So I straight away did some research, really, and I took that, I guess, position of being kind of the new person and being a bit objective, and learnt the lay of the land and got to know, I guess, what the status was of people's wellbeing and how they felt about wellbeing in the organisation and what the culture was like. And thankfully, it was mostly positive. Well, it was very positive findings. And since then, we've just been working on really keeping in contact with people, and connection is our number one sort of focus. Also, job crafting and making sure that, as you said, Joep, like making sure that people feel that they're in control of their work and that they have, autonomy, that they're working on things that are interesting to them. But really what we always come back to is listening to the voice of lived experience with mental health, both from a wellbeing perspective and a mental illness perspective, because we do have quite a few people working at WayAhead who have mental illness, have lived experience of mental illness, and making sure we take that into account. Sometimes wellbeing programs, and I've really learned a lot in my time at WayAhead, sometimes wellbeing programs that are up on the sort of prevention end of the spectrum are not always, what's the right word to use, necessarily appropriate or inclusive or accessible. That's the word, accessible for people who might be living with a mental illness. Yeah. So that's been a really interesting experience for me, learning about traditional, I guess, organisation-wide wellbeing programs, and then what that might actually be like for a person with lived experience, and not just something like depression or anxiety, but some of the less common mental illnesses as well. Because as you touched on before, wellbeing and mental illness are not two ends of one spectrum. They're two different spectrums.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think we've probably had enough discussion around that. I'm really thankful for my training as a clinical psych when I moved into this space, because I had the education, and I was mindful and aware that people, just based on statistics, that people in the room, there may be, a range of psychological disorders or distress going on. And, in early on, particularly in positive psych research, it was being tested on a so-called normal population, or that's changing now over time, but it's a really good point. I wonder, could you speak to some of the research you've done as well around, I guess, the different, and I think I may be familiar with some of the research you did that sort of validated those different categories. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, so we've done a little bit of research on that to actually see, like, when you look at a general, like the normal population, it was quite interesting. If you look at our database, we looked back 3 years ago when we kind of still operated in that well-being space, where we didn't want to talk about the stress. So we're like, look, we do our bit, and if there's a problem, we'll make sure that there's a EAP, or we'll refer on to make sure that everybody is treated with the services that they would need in an organization, right? When we actually started looking at our data of the people that came to either our training or our measurement, you could very clearly see that depending on where we were measuring, over 20% had moderate to severe distress while we measured them. Wow. So it wasn't as simple as just, look, we're going to give you a bunch of methods that you can use in your life, but we're going to forget about that other thing that's sitting there. We actually needed to change our approach. So we in our organization have, as a result of those measurements, been really started focusing on that dual continuum model. And maybe one of the papers that you're referring to is the scoping review that was led by one of my colleagues, Matthew Ayasiello, that he actually canvassed the whole literature, and that clearly found that the dual continuum model, that it actually upholds. Doesn't matter whether you measure it in Australia or in China or around the world. It doesn't matter what illness or diagnosis you use, what measurement tool you use. Generally, the dual continuum model just upholds across the board. Major extreme depression is an exception, but I won't go into that because that will just become too technical. But generally, it upholds. So there's so much evidence to suggest that if you want to target mental health, you shouldn't just focus on well-being. And if you want to run a well-being survey in your organization, don't just use well-being items, also use the stress items. If you want to run a mental health survey, do the same. So also use well-being items and the stress items. Make sure that they're validated and reliable while you do it, which would be nice. Yeah.
That's really, I mean, this field is particularly the wellbeing measurement and the new tech platforms that are popping up. This is so important, this discussion, and perhaps it's not, we could have a whole different panel just around that. But what I know that SAHMRI was very early on, particularly given Marty Seligman was down there as the thinker in residence, and was involved in some training programs in South Australia. I was on a panel, I think, with I'm trying to think who it was now, but how has that affected your training programs? Has it actually, your wellbeing training programs, being aware of that existence of the broad spectrum, I guess? Yeah,
it's been massive. So like, I think Keys is most probably one of the most underrated, influential scientific academics in the wellbeing space. Full stop. He does not get the credit that he deserves for what he's done. When we started exploring this, and particularly after the scoping review, we completely changed our approach to training delivery. We completely changed our approach to measurement, but we particularly focused on developing training offerings that allowed individuals to figure out whether they're currently struggling with either distress or well-being, and then teach them how to match activities to their needs. Because if you look at running a program and you test a population and you give them a psychological intervention and you test them on the stress and on well-being, even though on average both of them might improve, what you see within an individual is actually something completely different. Only a proportion of people improves in well-being, only a proportion of people improves in distress, and only a proportion improves in both. And we normally don't think of this. We think of group differences and not of what happens within the individual staffer that you're working with. And that matching to individual needs is something that I hope our field moves more and more to as we mature.
So perhaps more personalised mental health and wellbeing plans for individuals. We might see.
Yeah, and you can, and so we package that into a training offering. You can put it into an app. You can use it as one-on-one or group work. There are so many vehicles now that you can do this with. We really don't have to do programs that are just stock standard anymore. We're kind of ready to move to that next stage, and I hope that organizations will start exploring that.
It's really interesting. Thank you. So, Steph, I know when we spoke too, and there was this increasing recognition of the responsibility for psychological health and safety at the organisational level, that you'd spoken about some of the areas that you think need attention too, from, I guess, a mental health and wellbeing perspective. Did you want to briefly speak to that?
Sure. I think when we spoke, what I was referring to is around that work design. So, there's this thing, this has sort of been a rhetoric that's been around for a while, this sort of give them more resilience training, put more demand on people, or go through a huge event like COVID, and then we'll just train them up with resilience. And now I am all about resilience training when it's done, authentically and holistically, because as we know, resilience can be learned. It is a skill that we can nurture and develop. Having said that, of course, if, it's not an excuse to just pile on more stress or, say, get away with a culture of burnout and that sort of thing. So I come back to in this sector, I talk about work design a lot, something I feel very passionately about. If we can actually make the workplace, make the work we do, the way we do it, not just psychologically safe, but actually keeping people well. And actually a way that you used the word flourish earlier, you know, can work be a tool to not just keep people well, but actually get them to flourish, to increase their mental well-being. So, yeah, I think that comes down to things like, and the other thing I sort of tend to always talk about in this space is leadership skills, leadership capability, getting the right people for the right work, people who are in leadership roles, making sure that they have basic people management skills and training at a minimum to make sure things like performance management is done effectively and done efficiently and done in a way that is ongoing and, you know, supportive. That's how you create a culture of safety and of flourishing. And, you know, making sure that the workday, the ability to be flexible, and obviously that's going to depend on what kind of work you're doing. So, yeah, I think making sure that the organisation isn't just throwing resilience training out when there's a culture of burnout, a culture of toxic, you know, a toxic culture, but rather having looking at the whole sort of design of the workplace, the work that's being done. And unfortunately, that is quite a marathon, I suppose, and it doesn't look as sexy when you're, you know, presenting it as a marketing sort of best employer type of thing. It's not a fancy employee wellbeing program, but really it's about making sure that it's a sustainable work model.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I've noted that often in organisations, and it's changing a little bit with COVID, but before we'd be called in if it was a mental health issue, I guess, or then it might be a wellbeing or wellness issue, and then we're called in. We do a lot of work in leadership development and coaching, a leadership development. But to me, you know, they're all connected, and there are some, you know, key psychological skills that I think can certainly support. But also, you've raised a really important point in terms of the leaders, because I was just talking to my colleague Audrey McGibbon, and she on Org Psych, and she was saying, you know, it's great that people are recognising that we can't just throw resilience training, and we need to look at organisation, the role of the organisation and structures and systems. But she said, let's not forget it's people, and in particular leaders, that change those systems. So we need to continue to invest in leadership to be able to make those changes, which I think was a really important point. Now, Ian, let's come back to you. So would you say you're firmly in that sort of proactive space? Is that what you were saying? Your organisation is sitting there?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we're a people organisation, and this is just it's all about helping men, just supporting men in their life journey. So the core of the program is mentoring, and I've been involved with 4 different mentoring programs, and the studies consistently show the impact this has on the mentors in terms of the sense of purpose and fulfillment, and the impact it has on the mentees in terms of helping them get to a better place. It's in many cases that they've been isolated or lonely. All of a sudden, there's someone on their team who's actually listening to them. Yeah. And said we've got Western Sydney University at the moment. Professor Emma George, I think it is doing a study into the results of our program throughout southwestern Sydney. Wow. We're also reaching out into the more disadvantaged areas. So we've just run a training course in Arabic to Syrian and Iraqi refugees who have come from war-torn areas, and we have a strong gender diverse group within the organisation. So we're reaching out to the areas that aren't mainstream but have a higher incidence of the mental, not good mental well-being, and so supporting them. So we're seeing some great results. In fact, SBS did a thing on that last week.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So I think what we're talking about is, and I often will talk to, whether it's a school or an organisation, about having a broad mental health and well-being, you know, a strategy that addresses, you know, depending on where people are and what their needs are, which is what you was referring to as well. I would love to see not just more men, clearly, as we noted before, that's been an area where they haven't come forward, but I would love to see more people generally in Australia seek therapy. And I usually say it's not like New York yet where people brag about their therapists. We're all talking about it, but haven't really, I mean, again, with COVID and the increase in the number of particularly Medicare referral sessions has helped. We only have about 5 minutes left. It'd be great to do a whip around and any final points or reflections that might help the audience when we're coming to look at looking beyond illness. Joep, would we go back to you?
Maybe the key takeaway that I think we just try and instill on pretty much anyone that we work with comes back to that notion that Steph just briefly highlighted, is that you can change your mental health and your resilience or your well-being or whatever you want to call it. Your mental health by itself can be changed, and we all can be taught how to better deal with tricky situations. Life by itself is rather difficult, right, for all of us. So we all need to learn how to navigate our personal life and our professional life. And I think organizations realize that they invest, or they can invest in resilience skills training or psychological skills training or whatever you want to call it, for a simple reason, is that they see the benefit in their people, and for them that translates to a bottom line, and that's completely fine, right? They see an incentive other than just the mental well-being, but they see it for one reason, and that is that you actually start to feel better. There's a reason why athletes invest in their well-being and their mental health. It's a reason why the army likes to do it, is because we all start functioning better and feeling better. So the rhetoric around like resilience training or self-compassion or daring to lead, it's all good. And what I'd like to get people to figure out is like what resonates with you, so you can start making a positive change, and the same what works for your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there have been some critiques around, we haven't had the longitudinal research to see whether these, particularly I guess in schools where it's still relatively early days, but I usually come from, I guess, experience and having worked with a clinical site and seeing the impact that learning some of these basic psychological skills, often reactively after the curveballs have hit, having those skills then for life can make to a real difference to a person's life. Clearly, the context, you can skill somebody up as much as you like, but if you put them in a toxic environment, it's not going to be easy. But I would say, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't we be teaching these skills in schools and in workplaces?
Yeah, because it helps though, and you have a locus of control. There's only certain things you can control as an individual, and one of them is how you react to events. So, job crafting, great. Let's do it together with teaching people helpful ways to deal with stress.
Absolutely, thank you, Steph.
Yeah, I guess my final point is reiterating what you said there, I guess, about making sure that it goes together. You can't have resilience training or, mental health training or mental health first aid training without that sort of workplace culture and that work design being looked at. And the main point I want to sort of finish with as well is really around, as we touched on, how mental illness is not the opposite of mental well-being, and that actually a person with diagnosed mental illness, whether that's borderline personality disorder or schizophrenia or something like that, can flourish and have fantastic mental well-being. But perhaps those mental wellbeing programs in a workplace might not be as suitable for them. So I just think it's really important to look at prevention around that space of work design, but also have a mental illness lens and an inclusive and accessible sort of lens on things as well.
Yeah, that's so important. And I had considered it, as I said before, but I think this is a whole different, discussion that you raised some really good points, and you too, Ian, final comments.
Okay. What I've seen over the last few years is the importance physical exercise can play in good mental health. And we run walk and talk events. We're now partnering with the Man Walk. If we could get every man in Australia out walking and talking openly, we would have a dramatically improved situation, far less mental health issues. So physical exercise for most of us, I think, is key.
Actually, my partner often says to me, Suzy, walk and talk. So thank you so much, Steph, Ian, and you. It's a fantastic panel discussion. We could have continued on, but we have to wrap up now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suzy, for your wonderful moderating as always, and to the panelists for joining us today. What a wonderful way to wrap up